welcome to Healing from the Ground Up. I'm your host, Eric Greenleaf, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. John C. Warner, one of the founders of Green Chemistry, an organic chemist, university professor, a researcher for Polaroid Corporation, and now a founder of Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry. John, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to talk with you already. Tell me a bit, and our listeners, about the origins of green chemistry, knowing whatever we know about physical chemistry, organic chemistry, and the like.
Okay. Well, I guess the way to look at green chemistry is to ask yourself, why would a chemist make a material that is toxic? Why would a chemist make a material that is hazardous for the environment? We know that we have red dyes that cause cancer. We know we have plasticizers that cause birth defects. We know that we've got monomers that cause endocrine disruption and whatnot. We're always wondering, these things are here, what do we do with them? But the fundamental question is, why would someone make it in the first place? Wouldn't somebody, if I was making a bottle for baby's milk or making a cell phone or something, wouldn't I by definition prefer to have it be safe? Why would I make it toxic? And the startling realization is that the field of chemistry has evolved over the last 180, 200 years to not see that as part of our role. So if you look at any university, pretend you want to be a chemistry major, and look at the classes that you must take to graduate to be chemist, you will never find a university requiring you to take a class in toxicology or environmental mechanisms. So when you ask yourself, why do we have red dyes that cause cancer and plasticizers that cause birth? Well, how could we not if the people who invent those materials have zero training or background in toxicity and environmental impact? So green chemistry is the repair mechanism to add to chemistry that missing element.
And thereby to teach material scientists, organic chemists, and other students of chemistry and researchers to consider sustainability, non-toxicity, along with such elements of chemistry as elasticity or durability of the material and so on.
Well, it's to look at toxicity and environmental impact in the same way we would look at elasticity or something else. So if you're working with a chemist that says, I need to make this material more elastic, well, they know mechanistically I have to do this to the molecule so that this happens so that it'll be more elastic. If you say, I want it to be less toxic, you get a blind stare. Okay, well, what does that mean? How do I, at the molecular level, deal with that? I had a class that taught me about elasticity, so I can apply that training to say, okay, I need to do this to the molecule to make it more elastic. When you say make it less toxic, there's no class in my past that has given me the skills to address that issue. So let's move on. And so that, bottom line is that I feel, in my opinion, that people want safe materials, they just don't have the skill set and the training to make it. And the revolution that is called green chemistry is say, let's imagine a world where every chemist has that fundamental training so that they approach it in exactly the same way they would any other typical chemical problem and be able to start solving them.
And so in the universities at large, there has been no training for chemists in non-toxic material use, identification, or even, I suppose, in identifying the toxicity in existing procedures and chemicals.
There is a field of toxicology, all right? So people go to school to learn exactly that. The problem is they don't interact with the people who make molecules. And so there's a separation of those who understand the mechanisms of toxicity and environmental harm, and then there are the people who make molecules, and they don't hang out together. And so it's not that the chemists need to become junior toxicologists, but to at least learn the fundamental language so that they can collaborate and interact better.
And you have what is a more common position nowadays, not just having had a career in the academy, but also in industry, working for Polaroid. How have you found people in industry responsible for developing new products and so on to be responsive to green chemistry?
Very, very interesting phenomenon. Because the word green is probably overused in our society, and most technical science people, they hear the word green and they roll their eyes and they go, oh, here we go, what is this going to be?
Yeah.
And so their initial reaction, if they don't know a green chemistry, is, oh God, what is this going to be, some tree hugging thing? What is this going to be? Then they hear it and they find out, oh, this is about faster time to market. This is about being competitive in the marketplace. This is about affordability, about lower cost because you've got less waste. And all of a sudden their ears perk up and say, well, this is not just a moral and ethical thing, but this is going to make us more efficient, more profitable, and all the things that they want to do in the first place. And so industry, once they understand what green chemistry truly is entirely responsive. They start their own internal work programs. They put together, awards internally. You'll find so many companies have adopted green chemistry principles and practices.
And you're implying that this isn't only true of, say, small shops and geographically limited companies, but also multinationals, large ones?
Absolutely. I'm not familiar with any big company that doesn't have a very active green chemistry program. Now, to be fair, they're wishing that they didn't have to teach their employees and that their employees were learning this at the university, but because they're not learning it at the university, they have to do it. And again, I do believe in the goodness of humankind and that there is a certain altruistic approach here, but it is a dollars and cents. This is about competitiveness and economic viability.
So, for example, big companies that are benoit to the green community at large, like DuPont or Dow, are also involved in green chemistry?
Absolutely. So, back in 1996, a group of people with me started what's called the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award. And this was done in the Clinton administration, and it is jointly given by the NSF, the EPA, the President's Office of the United States. And since 1996, every year, 5 awards are given to technologies and industry that have demonstrated the principles of green chemistry. And so if one Googles or goes onto that website and looks at it, you'll see now after 19 years, there were about 120 case studies of company this came up with this technology and has actually reduced the impact on human health and the environment, and this is how they did it. And so this is something that is pretty embedded in industry if you look for it.
And what are a couple of examples of that product development that you can think of?
So, some examples would be, and I'll just cite some examples that I've been involved in, at the Institute. For example, asphalt pavement. All right, if right now there's about 1 billion miles of road in the United States. Every year we dig up about 10% of that and repave it. Now, because the sunlight in the air oxidizes that pavement, it gets brittle and hard and it's not really reusable. So we put it in a landfill. And then we repave with brand new virgin asphalt and we put it down. And what a waste, because there's all that asphalt still in the old pavement. And so we've come up with a material that you add a tiny amount to the old asphalt and it rejuvenates it and allows you to process it at a lower temperature so that now you can take that old stuff and put it back where it was in the first place and not use new virgin petroleum, but reuse the petroleum that's in the old asphalt. That's an example of green chemistry, because not only is it sustainable to be using more recycled content, but it's not toxic. It's one thing to recycle, but if what you're using to recycle it is toxic, is the world better off? So the green chemistry says it's not enough just to do the sustainability part of it, to reuse the material, but make sure that the chemistry that you're using is non-toxic too.
And who developed that?
That's something that we did at the Institute.
And then you were able to convince, say, the big asphalt companies to use it? Or?
Yeah. So we it's interesting. The first thing I did was pave my own driveway, which was a perfectly good driveway. So my family was saying, "Why are we losing our driveway?" But we have to do something,
science.
right? Yeah, exactly, for the sake of science. So we dug up my perfectly good, almost exactly a year ago today in Boston. It was 17 degrees Fahrenheit, and we had 65% recycled content that was being paved. And the workers that were coming, so I had 30 tons of asphalt this cold day. We've got, these big dump trucks, and they're going to fill up the driveway, and the workers are laughing at me, saying, "John, you can't pave at this temperature. It's way too cold." And 65% recycled content, never been done. You can't do that. I go, when we open this up, one big hockey puck is going to come out. You can't do this. And they open it up, and powdered asphalt comes. They squeal like children. They get on their rollers, and they pull it. And a year and a week later, it is pristine and perfect in every way. Now, being gutsy, I had someone from the Department of Transportation. There was a little clipboard watching it all go, and a bunch of other officials from different government agencies to watch the process so that we could get through the regulatory processes of getting it used. And now, several hundred miles of roads paved in New England, and it's being spec'd in many different states. It's a long process to get it widespread use, but it's going. It's the name of the company is called Collaborative Aggregates, and I love entropy, and the name of the product is called Delta S, which is the chemical symbol for entropy. So
that's
kind of fun.
Yeah, it is fun. And they could be convinced by a literal pragmatic demonstration and see that it was applicable in cold weather, which is a big advantage in New England, and so on. How do you convince very hidebound institutions like universities to put green chemistry into their curricula?
It's difficult. That surprisingly is the hardest aspect. And this is not an epic battle of good and evil. This is I do not see evil forces afoot here.
Yes.
It's that being a professor is a demanding job, and there are many, you got to publish papers, you have to participate in governance, you got to teach, all this stuff here. And if no professor has had a class like this, who's going to teach it? And because that's the problem.
That too.
And so who's going to teach it? And so changing the curriculum is really, really hard, because the academic model works. We're graduating a lot of chemists that are very talented. If something's not broken, why fix it? And so the first, it's the classic first, we've got to acknowledge there is a problem before we can start to fix it. And so I don't think people see a problem. Oh, gee, we're doing really great. We've published 300 papers. The department has gotten all these grants. By every metric today, we feel that we're being super successful. So, but no one's saying, but wait a minute. Are your chemists creating molecules that are toxic? No one asked that question. So why fix it? Because it's not a problem. So the people who are making molecules, if they're not thinking about the toxicity, it's a big hurdle.
And yet there are some university departments with courses.
Oh, absolutely. It's changing. So there is a nonprofit organization called Beyond Benign.
Beyond Benign.
Beyond Benign. It's kind of a tongue twister there.
It is, but it's a nice concept.
Yeah, and Amy Cannon is the executive director, in full disclosure, my beautiful wife. And she has this thing called the Green Chemistry Commitment. Oh. And she's asking university department chairs of chemistry departments to acknowledge that, hey, gee, we don't have the resources to integrate this into the curriculum. So let's put a day in the future, 3-5 years, where we're going to be committed to figuring out how to do it. And if one university wants to have a standalone class that all chemists are required to take, well, that's great if that works for them. If another university says, well, gee, we teach organic and biochem, let's put a little bit here and a little bit there, and that works for them, fine. And if they start posting their curriculum in this, community of collaborators, and we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, then we start to get that curriculum, we start to figure out best practices, and we start to integrate it. So she started this about 6-8 months ago. Already almost 50 universities have signed on here. UC Berkeley is a signer of it, and so it's pretty exciting. I'm very optimistic. It's going to take time. I've got to be patient. I wish I could make things happen faster, but
well,
it's
you're
happening.
Used to producing things that work.
Yeah.
Did you guys consider a MOOC or something where you'd provide the curricula for the universities?
We teach. So after 10 years of industry, I left and I went to the University of Massachusetts system. And I felt it was very important to look at teaching chemistry. And we created the first and perhaps one of the only PhD programs in green chemistry. So the University of Massachusetts grants a PhD in green chemistry. Now, in this program, there is everything that a normal chemistry program would have. All the things that you need to do to go out and invent the future for the world. But what is added is a one-semester class in mechanistic toxicology, a one-semester class in environmental mechanisms, a one-semester class in law and policy. Now, what I found over the 10 years that I was at the university running this program, those students were in immediate demand. Upon graduation, within days, they would be hired. Because industry saying, well, wait a minute, you can solve problems that can get us to market, and you have a clue about all this regulatory stuff that none of us know anything about? Ooh. And so industry snapped them in a very, very successful program.
Because as you said to me earlier, the costs of meeting environmental regulations and other sorts of those concerns might equal the cost of a research budget in chemistry itself. If you obviate some of the environmental pitfalls by not having them, then if you could save half the cost of product development every year, it would be phenomenal for the businesses and the universities who produce chemists for those businesses would not have their head in the sand much longer.
Exactly.
I would think.
And what's interesting is the funding mechanism now, every university is different. Every university treats these kinds of issues differently. But in my experience, a chemist working at a university, their budget is how much does a material cost when they buy it. So you get a bunch of chemists, they buy from a vendor these bottles of chemicals, they mix things up, and when they're done, they put it in bottles and someone carts it away. On average, it costs 5 times more to cart away the molecules than to buy them in the first place.
Really?
Yes. But the professor doesn't see that cost. They only see the buying. The university absorbs as part of the overhead what's going on outside. So their mindset, they're not realizing, oh my God, all of this waste costs a lot of money to deal with. Now, when that student graduates and gets a job in industry, you bet they know about that money. And so they're saying, my God, how can we have a technology that doesn't generate this amount of waste, because that's going to save us an awful lot of money.
So that small amount of material that you added to the old asphalt does exactly that. It saves the landfill costs, the environmental damage, the carting here and there, the production of brand new material every year. It's pretty big.
And see, I feel for us to have a truly sustainable future, we need to have the science that is truly sustainable. If we have regulations forcing people to use inferior technologies that are too expensive, there's a certain unsustainability about that. The wrong election result happens and that regulation changes. So if we have subsidies promoting it, and then again something happens politically and that subsidy ends, then we go back. And so the only real solution is for the chemist to say, I need to have a technology that works better than anything else, costs the right amount of money, and oh, by the way, is not toxic and doesn't hurt the environment. And so if a chemist sees that as a design flaw, that toxicity and environmental impact is just as bad as anything else that would make something unsuccessful in the marketplace, and gets their butt back in the lab and invents a better product, someday we move forward and we start to have better products that are truly sustainable. But if the students aren't having classes to learn toxicity and environmental
They don't
impact,
think about it ever. Otherwise,
Not part of
except
the
as a
right.
political question or a moral
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, but and so for this to succeed, it must be an intellectual endeavor. That the most challenging science, if I'm asked to make a red dye,
Yeah.
I'm asked to make the red dye stick to a fabric. I want it not to fade in the sun. I want it to not oxidize in the air. That's what a typical chemist that's working in industry has these design criteria, and they work tirelessly for years to make that just right red dye that sticks to the right fabric. If we say, and oh, by the way, I want it not to be a carcinogen. Well, if I don't know the mechanism that causes cancer, how can I design a molecule that doesn't cause cancer? If I find out that when a flat molecule fits into the major groove of DNA and causes some kind of an electron transfer reaction that initiates a mutagenic effect, well, gee whiz, if I design that molecule so it doesn't fit into the major groove of DNA, it's no longer carcinogen. But if I've never had a class that taught me that mechanism, how can I do it? Now, we're never going to be perfect. There are so many mechanisms out there, but anything that's non-zero is going to help.
Anything non-zero will help.
Yeah.
And what are some of the other inventions or in green chemistry that you conceive of as having big effects if widely applied? And the asphalt is certainly not trivial in that regard, because there are, so many miles of roadway.
So there's different layers and aspects of a question like that. So for example, there is this concept called E-factor. I won't go into the boring details of the math behind it and all that, but essentially what it is a ratio of the amount of waste generated during the manufacturing process. Right? And different industry sectors have different amounts. So the petroleum industry is incredibly efficient. Everything they pump out of the ground, they're turning into products. There's almost no waste. And so it's an old, mature industry that they've just figured all that stuff out. Some industries will have 10%, 20%. Do you realize that the pharmaceutical industry, on average, for every 1 gram of product, will be generating over 200 to 1,000 grams of waste?
Wow.
So if a pharmaceutical company makes less waste, we already talked about the cost of dealing with that waste, their profits go up. And so that's, interestingly enough, is where these high-end products that have a lot of waste, the electronics industry also has a great deal of waste associated with it. And all of that waste gets translated into cost, that gets translated into cost of doing business. And so from a very practical, pragmatic perspective, if you design the synthesis and the manufacturing process to generate less waste, everybody's happy. But if you don't have the skill set to do it,
then you can't.
You can't.
But I like the idea, everybody happy, and it doesn't matter what they think they believe.
Mm. Yeah, it's an intellectual pursuit. Whether or not, if my job is, gee whiz, when I wash this shirt, the blue dye comes out. This is a bad product. How can I make this blue dye stick better to this cotton?
Yeah.
That's a fundamental chemistry thing that I can talk about all my classes and training and say, this is something worthy of intellectual pursuit. I'm going to design the molecular structure of this dye to stick better to this thing. If we could just get people to see, and I don't want it to be a carcinogen, I don't want it to persist in the environment, I want it to degrade, as exactly the same kind of technical problem, and look at it at the same molecular level, we can start making progress and start solving these problems.
Now, in teaching about and promoting green chemistry, it sounds as though you have partnerships with all kinds of people. As a professional chemist, as a green chemist, as a university professor in the past, you move easily in these worlds without prejudice. Nor do they have any toward you, because you're not different from them. You too have worked in industry, you too have taught courses and waited for summer vacation and all those things. And for the general public, and for professionals, do you have books or films or other ways of instructing? I know you have websites, and you're quite free to advertise your website here.
Well, yeah. Well, I do encourage just Googling green chemistry.
Yeah.
And there are things that I have been part of generating that's on the web and in books and in journals and things like that. But there are so many other people in this field that are working hard and doing this too. So I have no lock on having the best material out there. There's a lot of good material out there. The Beyond Benign is an excellent website and nonprofit organization, because what they're doing is they're saying we need to start early. We need to get the K through 12 students to understand green chemistry and to understand this path.
That's right.
Because if you think about it, here's an interesting thing. If you accept, so I believe right now that of all the materials and processes out there, 90% of them have some problem with toxicity, environmental impact. 90% of them. Now, some of these problems
And
are
these
big.
are tens of thousands of molecules.
Yeah, so some are big problems, some are little, but think about that. If you do a Google search and look in the supply chain and try to find a better alternative, you will only be successful, in my opinion, maximum 25% of the time. So right now, today, I would argue over 65 to 70% of the technologies out there have no better alternative. They have not been invented yet. Now here's the catch-22. If the people who invent technologies are not having classes in toxicology, environmental impact, how does that number ever change?
Yes.
So imagine you're looking at a group of 8th grade students. Their eyes are as big as silver dollars. They want to save the world. They're going to grow up and they're going to make a difference. They're going to save the world. And they're going to list all the different professions that might be on that agenda to save the world. Is chemistry on that list? Now, if it's not on that list, who's going to invent the safer materials? Yes. So Beyond Benign is saying, interestingly enough, when you talk about sustainability and toxicity in the positive way of solving these problems, it creates context to the pedagogic lessons. And so what they've done is they don't say we should teach green chemistry. They say when we teach trigonometry, why not have illustrative examples that exemplify green chemistry? When we teach whatever subject that a teacher must teach, here is how to do it and how to infiltrate into the curriculum. And so there's massive amounts of lesson plans, hundreds of them that are freely downloadable on the website, that teachers can say, okay, my state has this framework that says I must teach the following subject. They can download for free this lesson plan.
And then they can teach it to their saucer-eyed 8th graders. Yeah. John, this is fascinating. I thank you for the conversation. I hope all of you will join us next time for our show with John C. Warner on biomimicry. I'm Eric Greenleaf, and this is Healing from the Ground Up.